how it actually fares against Temur Reclamation.
Yeah, you have this back and forth of, if everyone's playing these aggro decks, then I need to load up on cards like Shadow the Sky or Glass Casket and other removal. But once I do that, I don't know if I'm necessarily favored against Team of Reclamation anymore when I have these dead cards rotting in my hand.
Well, it looks like both players are going to be firing on all cylinders with a bunch of growth spirals opening up the first few turns here.
Although for Vargas, he doesn't have any lands to put in with it just yet, so that could be a major limiting factor for him in this game.
Interesting mousing over Spectral Sailor there with a growth spiral in hand. What do you think the logic is there?
I don't know. I think he might think that if he doesn't have a land yet, then the value of the growth spiral goes down. So the line might be dig proactively for lands and also get the sailor down, and then on a future turn, hopefully you can get full value out of your growth spiral.
Sure. And now this is a situation where Tyler doesn't actually know that Javier has a land light hand, so he's sort of priced into protecting this Teferi with a mystical dispute, despite not knowing what's actually going on.
Yeah, this is a common question that you have to ask yourself in these blue mirrors: is do I jam Teferi as soon as I can and force them to have the dispute, or do I wait to protect my Teferi with the dispute, but then I have the shields down for a turn, they can land a sorcery speed threat, or I leave myself open to these plays which normally I wouldn't care so much about. And playing the Sailor in response to the Teferi, we see this set up with Brazen Borrower, where they're often like forced to bounce the Brazen Borrower, and then it's in your hand, so you petty theft the Teferi, and we have this weird song and dance. But the Dispute will tag the Sailor, and Teferi will now land, and yeah, this is really bad news for Javier Vargas.
Right, Javier really just needs to try to find some way to actually get onto the battlefield. Luckily, there are a couple of Shark Typhoons hiding out in hand. It's all a matter of if Javier can just find more lands.
And he does, so I think we keep playing Magic here.
Yeah, absolutely. So these Hydroid Crazies that we see hiding out in Anderson's hand are a great foil to Shark Typhoon, but honestly, in a lot of ways, it feels like they're going to be sized pretty similarly.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we're going to see Tyler go for a small Krasis or wait to make a Krasis for 4 on the following turn, where it's much larger, which is relevant in the face of Shark Typhoon, and also gets you an extra card. And yeah, he's gonna wait here. He doesn't feel like he's under pressure.
Yeah, I'd be interested in waiting in this spot. You get an extra card, and that's just a really big deal in a matchup that's still in its sort of grindy phases of the game. You aren't just slamming haymakers quite yet. So when you're working to posture, I think this is a good way to lean.
And now is a good time for a Krasis, because if nothing else, the Blast Zone on the board can deal with the Teferi over the course of the next 2 turns. And then if Javier's hand is flush with interaction, then maybe you get the card out of the Krasis, but not the body, and that could be a problem. So do this now and force Javier to have something that can deal with it, and then the cards that you drew off your sequence of Krasises can follow that up and cement your advantage.
Right, and this is a spot where Vargas is more or less priced into cycling a Shark Typhoon unless you were trying to activate the Blast Zone. But at the point where you roll down your Teferi, you would have basically have to make sure that you can check an opposing Shark Typhoon.
Mm-hmm. And a Scry here for Vargas, finding Uro in a land, keeping both on top.
And look at this clean up action from Storm's Wrath.
Yeah, Storm's Wrath, not a card you usually associate with being good against ban, but in this situation, it is money.
Yeah, this is really big. I think I would have liked to have seen Uro get drawn there, just because you would get to cast Uro as well as the copy of Storm's Wrath.
Right.
If they had been in a slightly different order, but overall, it still just feels like that turn was a huge win for Vargas.
Yeah, and now Vargas can proceed to play his Commence the Endgame. He can cycle Shark Typhoons. It is likely that Tyler has backup Teferi, and that's what we see here. So Commence is a little worse in the face of that. And this Uro actually too could be a big problem here.
Right, and this is a position where Anderson just really needs to be able to get something on the battlefield to protect this Teferi, or the fact that Vargas just has three kinds of threats in hand is going to take over.
Quick graveyard check here. So
Yeah, and Anderson definitely is in Uro range next turn with Gust and Veto backup.
yeah, I think that's very likely to be good enough here. And even if it isn't, a gigantic Krasis can follow up. And if somehow the what would it be? 7/7 at least Hydro Krasis. If
yeah,
a big flyer isn't good enough, the 3 or 4 castles it draws is likely to be instead.
Yeah, exactly. This is a position that Anderson's got to feel pretty good about, with a high life total, a ton of resources available to kind of hang in the late game. Certainly a lot of game left, though.
Yeah, and as the Bant Ram deck, this is kind of how you draw it up. This is what the games you expect to win look like, where you kind of have this fight over an early Teferi and force them into an awkward position, and then the mana advantage that you were able to gain in the meantime, you start leveraging that with your Hydroid Krasis, or you play a threat and you hold up a Dovin's Veto or a Dispute and put your opponent in a world of hurt.
And we see Anderson going ahead and respecting this blast zone that's on the battlefield by proactively immediately rolling down this Teferi to not bounce something like a Shark Typhoon token, even though Vargas more or less signaled that there was another Typhoon in hand by cycling 1 for 0 last turn. That's just trying to respect what's on the battlefield and accommodate for that.
Yeah, and we see Tyler makes a 5/5 Krasis, which is the same size as the biggest shark that Vargas can make on that turn. So he's now faced with the prospect of a potential trade. And he did that, he could maybe make a 6/6 shark, hold up Dispute, or just take the shields down and make a 7/7 shark. But he values the ability to hold up Dispute very highly.
And how's this for something to play through Mystical Dispute, Dovin's Veto, and Aethergust commence the end game?
Yeah, this is the maximum punishment where it can't be countered, and also you just roll down your Teferi, so now it can't be bounced immediately either.
Right. Luckily, this is a 6/6 zombie, which means an Uro will be able to go toe-to-toe with it. And just look at the cards that players have available to them. Anderson still has so much gas left in the tank compared to Vargas, who it feels like is starting to kind of get to the end of his resources, comparatively.
Yeah, the Shark Typhoon, maybe he has high hopes for that, but the Reclamation is dead in face of the onboard Teferi, and you know that there's an Uro for Anderson, so your own Uro looks a little less impressive. So yeah, I think we might see Vargas taking these very aggressive lines. Just he knows that he's outmuscled when it comes to any of these other metrics. But I think he knows he needs to end the game quickly.
Right, and there's a point where the way to get you back out of these situations is something like a big explosion to the face, but the downside of playing through Aethergust, Dovin's Veto, and Mystical Dispute, blanking those cards for several turns, is that means they're more likely to end up in your opponent's hand later on, because they've been stranded there for so long.
Absolutely.
So you see Anderson go ahead, bring back this Uro, scryed Elspeth Conquers Death to the bottom with this copy of Temple of Plenty.
If you can afford to bottom a card that impactful in the matchup in a spot like this, you have to be feeling great.
Yeah, it's a real up and down situation, right? What's it going to target?
Well, yeah, it's I guess a Reclamation that is dead with the onboard Teferi, or maybe an Uro potentially, but you have 2 Gusts to fight over that.
Right. It feels like it's running out of targets here, and we see that token go ahead and trade with the Uro. And it's a little hard to see what Vargas's path out here is. What do you think that Vargas is trying to accomplish with these attacks?
Yeah, I think he's quickly getting desperate here, very understandably. And yeah, a negate which normally would be excellent, but the Teferi just blanking it, as it has done for the past year and change.
Certainly ironic that Dovin's Veto and Teferi were in the same set.
Yeah, Dovin must be feeling really overshadowed right now. Do they ever interact in the lore? Is that a stupid question?
Yeah, so Dovin is the reason that the gang went to Kaladesh.
Oh, who is the gang in this spot?
The Gatewatch.
Oh, of course. It is pretty humiliating not to even be the most powerful Azorius Planeswalker in your own block. You know, at least give him a small niche to call his own.
Oh, they did. I believe that was called Prison Realm.
Hmm. So for Tyler, it can't feel great when your opponent already has close to a dozen lands in play and plays a shock land untapped. Like, you know what that means, and you know it's not good for you.
Oh yeah, you know there is honestly a grandpa shark coming.
I don't know enough
music
about, like,
fans out there.
I'm not an expert on marine animal taxonomy, so I don't know what the biggest type of shark actually is. Like, if I had to guess, I would say a whale shark, because it has the word whale in it. But someone fact check me on that quickly before I embarrass myself. Dig this hole even further.
Pretty sure the terminology is just a grandpa shark. I heard an incredibly educational song about it once.
So yes, Uro gets Ether Gusted, and this puny 6/6 cannot even attack profitably here.
Yeah, this has got to feel really rough when you have that negate and you're just getting hit on all sides by this kind of thing.
It is worth noting that Reclamation does still supercharge a Shark Typhoon even under Teferi, because you're not casting a spell, you're just paying for the cycling cost. So unclear how relevant that's going to be this turn. I guess there's 2 mana floating, and then 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. So that's a 10/10 Shark if you're sinking everything into it, which is that's impressive. But Tyler can match that himself if he untaps.
Right. There's certainly a point where, assuming that Vargas has the ability to untap with this wilderness reclamation, that'll happen. But with an Aether Gust in Anderson's hand, it's yet to be seen if that's exactly on the table here. Oh, a main phase 2 shock in of the breeding pool. Vargas going for the high score.
Yeah, high rolling here. And yeah, that breeding pool is an extra 2 toughness and power for this massive shark. But yeah, Teferi now at the point where it can either bounce the Wilderness Reclamation straight up, or if Vargas goes for the Massive Shark, it can just bounce that instead. So really between a rock and a hard place here, and Nissa is going to threaten to end this game very quickly. Not that the 7/7 wasn't about to do that already.
Right, now we're in a position where Nissa is actually just going to make it to where Anderson is so far ahead in terms of development that Vargas is going to struggle to hang it all this game. And we see Vargas go ahead, cycle this Shark Typhoon for 7, but Anderson has a Petty Theft at the ready to get that Shark out of the way before it even makes it to the Declare Block step.
And Brazen Borrower / Petty Theft is a card that picked up a lot of stock in the past week, as it was the go-to for the Shark fights in these blue mirrors.
It's great in Shark fights. It's great at clowning the card Wilderness Reclamation during a second main phase. It really just does a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes you even get into these spots where you lead on the Petty Theft to bounce their Teferi and force a counter, and then either Teferi is picked up, and you can fight with your own interaction again, or they counter that, and you have a greater chance of sticking the threat that you actually cared about.
Right.
I wonder how many Uro triggers have resolved in this game in total so far.
Yeah, honestly, I would imagine both players have already lost a cumulative 60 life.
We've got to be in double digits.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And going ahead and casting this Uro or escaping it now is a loud signal, because that's just announcing that this Blast Zone is not going after Teferi this turn.
Mm-hmm. And one of those gusts that has been hanging out in Tyler's hand for a long time does attack the Uro again. And so, yeah, Warden's Reclamation will get vetoed, and that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah, it looks like that is it, with Vargas going down against Tyler on really just what feels like it's become the sort of de facto Team of Reclamation killer.
Yeah, and that's a typical play pattern, I think, for the Ban versus Teamer matchup, where Ban is able to stick a Teferi and is solidly ahead, but it takes another 8 or 9 turns for the game to actually end, because you really have to think carefully